What was the hardest piece of news you've had to tell someone? I worked as a pediatric psychology fellow while in graduate school, PhD clinical psychology. This invoked providing psychological services for all children in the hospital. One of my very first weeks I was shadowing a more experienced fellow, and we encountered a family whose child, 7-year-old girl, was hospitalized after she was in a car accident with her father. Her father died in the accident and no one in her family was comfortable directly explaining this to the child. They had used a lot of religious euphemisms about death. He's watching over you in heaven. He's with you in spirit. But this language is not concrete enough for a young child who doesn't really understand death. Sitting with this child, body brace, lacerations all over, very flat effect, and explaining to her what death was, that her father had died, and having to ask questions to make sure she understood, was one of the most traumatizing experiences of my graduate training. I can still vividly imagine her face while we were telling her, and the tears silently rolling down her face. Thank you for your compassion. I'm sure that was horrifically challenging, but the fact that you remember her shows how much it affected you, and I'm sure she affected your personal and professional development. You are good people for taking on that pain to help her and her family. To tell my boyfriend his best friend was the body found in the river after he had been missing for 2 days. This hits close to home. My boyfriend's little brother went missing for 2 days. They found his body in the lake behind his workplace, where he was reported missing. He was only 22. Yeah, my boyfriend's best friend went missing after a night out in another city. He was only 20. I'm sorry for yours and your boyfriend's loss. I'm sorry, man. I remember every single second of it. It was truly awful. I hate knowing another person went through something so similar. We just recently, 2 days ago, he died 2 years ago, found out who killed him. Hoping that taking this to the media brings him some justice, as the police have already been told who did it, but didn't do anything about it. I hope you and his family get the justice and closure you are hoping for. Had to call my girlfriend parents at 1 AM to tell them there was a bad accident, that their daughter was en route to her, and I thought she would be okay. She died on arrival. Worst day of my life. Frick, dude. I can't imagine the pain you must have gone through. I hope you are kind to yourself. The kicker was slashes I was in that seat she was in, moments before, overcome by the need to get out and drive my own vehicle. We were just loading into car to leave. I got out and offered her to come with me in my car. She chose to stay and slid over into my seat. The seat that hit the tree would have been me. Her brother was my best friend for 15 years before. Telling someone's family that we are giving up on searching for their loved ones who are lost at sea. I've been a person that received that news, and I could only imagine how hard it must have been for the Coast Guard to decide that. They made an incredible effort in stormy weather. We didn't find out until later that my friends had been shot and thrown overboard. There was no chance for survival and nothing other than their boat was ever recovered. I always wanted to send a thank you letter to the Coast Guard, but 12 years later I still can't get past the first 2 lines. I joined search and rescue as a way to try and pay that back, but it proved to be more than I wanted to handle emotionally. So, thank you for trying so hard to find our loved ones. We didn't find out until later that my friends had been shot and thrown overboard. If you don't mind me asking, what's the story on that? Was it pirates/smugglers or something? My friend's husband owned a charter fishing company. The booker accepted 2 men without IDs believing a story that their girlfriends had their ids on an island the men were booking for. In reality, one was fleeing charges in another state and their intent was to steal the boat. After my friends were reported missing, the Coast Guard located the 2 passengers on the lifeboat associated with my friend's boat. They had money, weapons and a BS story about pirates killing everyone but them. There was enough evidence to convict the men, but one confessed to avoid the death penalty. There are crime shows that feature it, but so far none of the books or shows have been able to just tell the story without over dramatizing it, making it feel like they tarnish the memory. The show Dark Waters will do an episode this fall. They seemed respectful when I spoke to them. Let's hope they are. I won't be in the show because I declined to be named or on camera. Not really something I want to bear in such a way. When I was 22 my parents asked me to come home and watch my grandma who had dementia and needed a carriage driver while they went to visit my brother who was living out of the country. 2 days in, my grandma died in her sleep. Not only did I have to deal with being the person who found my grandma dead by myself, but I then had to call all of my various family members, parents, aunts, brothers, to let them know what happened. To tell my mom that my dad died 40 years later, I had to tell my kids I had cancer. I'm sorry, I should have said I beat it, at least for now. Wow, thank you for silver. So sweet. My brother, who was active military at the time, had to be granted emergency leave for my mother who was on her deathbed after a short but destructive battle with cancer. They took more than 24 hours to sign one name on that document to release him, even knowing the circumstances. When he became noticeably upset that they were taking their time with it, they pulled him aside and threatened to make him undergo a psych evaluation for being, understandably, angry. She died while he was on his flight home. I had to tell him over the phone that he missed the passing of our mom and he wouldn't ever be able to say goodbye. That was rough. Telling my 4-year-old his papa had died. Same. He was 4 too when papa died. My husband's parents live behind us, so he was used to going back and forth. He forgot, or I guess didn't understand, and walked out to show papa he had written his letters. He came back with huge tears dripping and sat at the kitchen table saying he just wanted papa to see he could write. When he fixed his eyes on me and said, "I'm drawing a picture of my papa, BC he's dead, I viewy sad mommy, viewy sad." I lost it. Had to tell my best friend in high school that I was the one who reported her dad for molesting her. She had spoken only to me in confidence and our pastor. They pulled her out of class after it was reported and allowed her a friend for comfort. She chose me, and as she sat sobbing, speaking of how horribly she hated our pastor, how she would never forgive him, I looked her in the eyes and told her it was me. I was 16. Edit. I've been in the woods with my dog all day and coming home to this outpouring of support from all of you. I'm sitting here crying my eyes out. At the time I truly did not think I was doing anything special. A friend was in trouble, and if you can help, you do. The pastor never received punishment for not reporting, and this was the beginning of my discomfort with organized religion. As for my friend, she completely cut off contact and moved out of state as soon as she could. Post-trial, she surprised me by visiting on a trip home a few years later. I will always remember how she looked when she said, "I'm so sorry we can never be friends again. I look at you and see everything. But you absolutely saved my life." I'm okay with that now. At the time it tore my heart up. My daughter died from suicide at 20 years old. My mom was in her last hours in hospice. I had to tell her. It was the worst weekend in my life. 10 years later, I still struggle with it. I miss them both every day. Edit. She told me she would look for her. Edit. I don't know much at all about this formatting thing. To answer as to why I told her, this was after my mom had a long battle with cancer. We made a pact early on, along with my sister, of a strict policy of honesty from then on. I was bound to tell her. I actually think the news helped her along to the other side. I have been beside loved ones at their deaths near in the past. It is not easy for them to let go. She died within the hour. This week marks 10 years. I'm now finally not relying on the bottle to cope. My wife, not my daughter's mother, but very close to my daughter just the same, has been a lifesaver and huge support despite my PTSD rage. Some days are great, others, I just want to give up. Your comments and gilding have uplifted me today. For that, I cannot thank you enough, dear editors. That cardinal living in my backyard for the last 8 years makes me smile every day. I had to tell my son, not biological, no legal rights to him, that I wanted to divorce his dad. I barely see him now, and he doesn't even consider me his parent anymore. I don't really know how to deal with it. I don't even think I'm supposed to still call him my son, but how do you become a not parent to someone you've parented, largely by yourself, for 8 years? Telling my mom that her yoga instructor, our longtime family friend and man of peace Sudaman, was murdered by a religious extremist that came from another state for the sole purpose of killing him. I was only 14 at the time and struggled. BC I knew how she would react, but also she needed to know. That sucked. Dear people watching, do you have similar stories? Leave them down in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. It will help me out a lot. Here's a meme to calm down the mood a bit. Nobody. Your custom character during a cutscene.